What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, here to talk about patch 14.4, which is coming to a server near you in about 1 week's time. I'm going to try to do this video a bit differently from others. There's actually probably still too much content that's going to be on the screen here, but ultimately, I think Phreak does a really, really good job of, if you haven't seen him on Twitter, go look at his posts. He previews what is, as of Tuesday night each time, what we intend our changes to be for the coming patch, and then has a good, succinct why we do each of these changes. So what I'm going to try to use this video for is more of the deep dive on bigger things that I was directly involved in or am thinking about. And so it's like, hey, why is this the patch in a sort of general sense, and not why all the very specific changes? And then in terms of mathing them out and their impact and diving into each one specifically, maybe that's the patch rundown. I'm not sure, but I think these tend to not need to be 90 minutes long and whatnot. Okay, so let's talk about how 14.3 went. I would say it overall went really well. We had 20-some individual changes in the patch, and most of them were pretty much bang on. There's a few things that are small outliers. So Aurelion Sol, after the micro patch, is about 1% win rate higher than he was in 14.2. And with that power, we bought a 250% pick rate, which is of the prior 2.5x the old pick rate. Obviously his pick rate's not 250%. That wouldn't be possible, but that's a really, really, really good trade. It's very hard to nerf a champion by 1% and remove 60% of their pick rate back out, which means that, yeah, we certainly got the tuning wrong on Aurelion Sol. My bad, right? I am largely responsible for getting the win rate magnitude wrong. The designer who made these changes is responsible for getting 2.5x the pick rate for very little power. We probably should have targeted +0. We probably could have found a change that was +0. Ultimately, I am suggesting that post-micro patch, these were some really, really, really good changes to Aurelion Sol. He's overpowered. We're going to nerf him this patch. We're going to take that 1% win rate back. But if the end result is a champion who is much more popular to play for the same win rate, that is awesome. So overall, pretty excited about those changes, but yeah, he's overpowered. Nidalee gained more win rate than we thought she was going to get. She's OP she's certainly OP in Elite. She's, I think, top 2 Elite MMR win rate champs in the game right now, so we probably will have to nerf her. It's just interesting to see, with a champion like Nidalee, she's very, very MMR skewed. That probably isn't going to go away. She's really an early game champion. She's really high mastery in just her jungle clear. I don't know if that's solvable. Regardless, though we're not going to touch Nidalee in this patch, we will probably have to nerf her in 0.5 because of her elite power level. And for people who are not at that MMR bracket, either it's going to require more practice or playing with a coordinated team, with your friends who are a little bit better at closing out games or something, who aren't going to throw as hard. But it's a compounding set of factors that, makes this true for Nidalee, and it is what it is. Maokai changes were directionally very good, but he's still too strong at support, so we're going to take him down again. Zyra, I believe, was directionally quite good, but she's still a bit OP in support, so I have to take her back down. Corki, though we did compensate with some buffs, he honestly still kind of sucks. His pick rate is currently falling because, yeah, he's not a very strong champion. A lot of what was carrying him was the Malignance Eclipse bug, making him really, really good on a 2-item spike. Ultimately, Corki is still actually quite good on Trinity Force, AD, not quite Bruiser builds, but just it's his best Gene item. Ultimately, I don't think we are close to doing a Corki kit update. I have an idea of what that would be. If literally everything works perfectly first time, this would take me 1 patch to knock out. That's very unrealistic. I'm not in any way promising Corki work anytime soon. I think he's relatively low priority, though I do have, I think, strong directions that we could chase down to make him the kind of champion that players would be willing to see as a relatively popular pick. That's really kind of weird phrasing there, but Corki unfortunately kind of sucks, and he is probably not first in line for kit health updates. Illaoi was really hard to know how much power to take away from her tentacles when we made them more reliable by giving them bonus range. She is OP, and yeah, we're walking that back some in this patch in 0.4. Two quick things about future work. There are not going to be any large projects for a bit. So if you're looking at 13.20, nothing that size for a while. Even if you look at something like 14.3, which was like taking systemic proc damage in a bunch of cases, nothing that size either for a little bit. A lot of my time is going to be taken up with some longer term projects that I can try to talk about in maybe around 4 patches or so. But ultimately, as people have moved back towards seasonal, we just don't have as many hands on live, and so we're just not going to have big stuff. There are things that we want to do, don't get me wrong, but they're just not going to be happening right away. There are some kit changes coming in for Galio and Seraphine that have been we've been working on in the background for a little while. Galio, the tuning's not there right now, but the direction is good. The types of things we're doing for Galio are good, so I'm pretty confident we can get that in for 0.5. This is essentially ensuring that he feels supported playing a bruisery play style. Right now, actually, we're seeing a lot of success on Shirelia's first as a like quasi-tank. That sort of not like be a Shirelia's bot, but like the idea of building items with some health in them as well is I think generally a shape that is testing pretty well, and just getting him to care about Rocket Belt and Shirelia's and Cosmic Drive and those kind of items is kind of the direction we're going here, and I think it's going pretty well. As far as Seraphine, no great teacher tips in 0.5. I think it's relatively likely that she does. She's in a state where her win rate delta between bot lane and support is 6%. Like, Seraphine is in the state where she's practically a must buff by our like win rate oracle data, which we don't have to actually adhere to, but she's like actually below the line of what we would typically consider a must buff champion. But because she's 53 in bot lane, we can't buff her, and so this just requires we do some kit work. Even still, with a 6% win rate delta, most players play her support, and so closing that gap to some degree is useful. The changes from 13.22 or whatever didn't land very well. Ultimately, the direction for the Seraphine work is to embrace her as a primary, or I should say, yeah, as mostly a mage when she's played in a farm role. Max Q, max E, good damage AP ratios, willingness to build Death Cap. You'll want to build, the old Seraph Leandri's build, that kind of thing. Like, those kind of items should come back, and so it's not just like Seraphs into like Ardent Sensor as her core build. So trying to make her a primary mage and downplaying her supportive aspects when she's played as a AP farmer, and then when she's played as support, closing the gaps on her skill orders. Like right now, WMAX is clearly her best by a lot, but players want to Qmax on Seraphine for the most part, or at least are mostly Qmaxing on Seraphine. A lot of Seraphine supports are Emaxing second, and it's not very good. And so closing the gap on all these things to say you can kind of play her whatever way you want can help make sure that you can't troll your builds and support, but also saying that, yeah, you're probably going to max QE when you're playing Mage Seraphine with, again, good ratios, good damage, right? Sort of looking kind of like a Lux or a Karma, where you're doing mostly damage and you have some utility is sort of the look here. Directionally, this is doing really, really well, where I think we're going to close the gap and it's going to be fun to play. Win rate magnitude is still in flight in terms of how much we need to give and take away. Again, she's currently too good as a primary bot laner, so she's going to have to lose something. But that's, again, hopefully going to ship in 0.5, but there's a quick talk about future work. Okay, so we are doing a bunch of systems changes in this patch. A lot of them are an overall look at support items. So we're going to actually go upwards from here. So one thing we're seeing in high-level pro play is a willingness for some support players to skip their support item and start with a Doran's Blade or a Doran's Ring to get early lane prio. That's not necessarily a problem, but it indicates that something might be out of whack if they're willing to skip out on that much gold income in order to do this. So one thing we're actually doing is nerfing the Doran's Blade, Doran's Ring start by removing the rule where you get all 3 stacks if you buy the item super late. Yeah, if you connect to the game by being DC for the first 5 minutes and you buy your item, I'm sorry you're not getting your stacks. Oh well, we're intentionally nerfing the Doran's Ring, Doran's Blade start because we don't want to give supports even more control over the early lane. They already have a lot of control over the early lane, and making it correct to have even more control there is not something we're interested in really supporting here. So that's just a rules nerf for that playstyle. There's also 2 changes around stack rate and stack timing. So you're going to get your first stack. Instead of at 2 minutes 8 seconds, you're going to get at 150, which means your second stack is going to come in at 2 minutes 10. That 2 minutes 10 is an exact timing that is intentional here. That's basically the inflection point here, where By putting stack 2 at 2 minutes 10, that gives enough time where if you're the lane with control, you can probably push wave 2 first and be the first to level 2. Where it was in 1324 and earlier was because you got 2 stacks by the start of wave 2, you only needed a little bit of control, and then if you were the one with Relic Shield, you would just last hit 2 minions, get 2 first off of your AD carry CSing 1 minion, and it just like flipped the matchup really hard. And I meant there really wasn't gameplay around the second wave. By saying, no, you're going to get 1 stack, you know, like pretty early on, but stack 2 is going to come late in the second wave, you can probably already fight and decide who's level 2 first and not just use 2 executes to take over the lane control. So that's generally the goal here. Also, because you're getting your first stack 18 seconds sooner, this means you can start gold generation a little bit sooner as well. And so the downside of not starting support item, or sorry, the upside of starting support item is a little bit better. Now, it's worth noting that because you're getting your first stack 18 seconds sooner, and the stack rate is getting slowed by 2 seconds, that is 9 iterations to break even with before. That's several minutes, right? And keep in mind that if you ever take a recall and you're just stuck on 3 stacks, that a stack rate decrease is not really making you any, you're not even going to notice it. So I would guess actually that the end result of slowing the stack rate down to 20 seconds from 18, but having these stacks start 18 seconds sooner is actually going to be a completion time buff, which really what we want here is power neutral, and we wouldn't even mind a little bit of power negative, but for now, power neutral is okay. We can go after overall support power level at a different patch. We're doing a little bit of stuff here. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, by only being a 2-second increase, we're not buffing roaming by that much. We actually do, by the way, have data on item completion times. And this is, to be clear, this is the time at which a Blood Song or Zazax or whatever enters your inventory. The 50th percentile completion time for an item shows up in your inventory is 14 minutes and 8 seconds. It skews by MMR a little bit, but like sub gold versus diamond plus is like a 13-second difference. Like, it's not that big. So there was a little bit of MMR skew to completion time, but like not by a very big deal. So anyway, 1408 is the default average time that an item is completed. And to be fair, that counts the time it takes you to like go down and find which item you actually want to pick and then click it. Also, you can't transform while you're in combat. And so there's like a generic like average add 5 seconds or something to the completion timer because the game literally doesn't let you complete it. And so, you know, we're basically at 40 minutes to be done. That's roughly where we wanted to be. That's roughly where we're at. Honestly, we're pretty close here. And we'll kind of keep that as the relative timer here. We can break it down by champion. We know how much faster ranged champions get it than melee champions. It's not that far off. It's like 20 seconds roughly on average. But we can, you know, retune if we need to. If some champs are a little bit over and some champs are a little bit under. Definitely, you know, melee champs with like bad wave access are definitely the slower ones. Obviously, the Terex of the world, right? And Zyra obviously just like prints stacks, you know, so quickly because it's very easy to hit enemy champions. But regardless, we're pretty close and that's fine. The other stuff, though, is some tweaks to the support items themselves. So first off is just a Blood Song ranged damage amp nerf. It's just a nerf. This item is, I think, getting overpoached still. The other two are reshapes to Solstice Slay and Zazax. Essentially, these numbers are getting tweaked to scale with gold. Right now, a problem I have that we agree is kind of a problem with support right now is functionally supports get a 2-item spike, but everyone else gets a 1-item spike because they all complete the first item at a relatively similar time. Supports tend to complete item 1, and by item 1, I mean like Shirelia's or Locket or whatever, about 1 minute slower than laners complete item 1. Roughly, right? Obviously, something like Yomu's is cheaper than a Kraken Slayer, but like roughly 1 minute, right? Their support item comes in usually about the time that their first item comes in. Usually support item is done about 1 minute before their first full completed item, on average, right? Talking about averages here. Ultimately, this means that pretty quickly, you are facing a support who has 2 items on you, because 200 health from like support item is like not stats, and the regen actually matters a bit as well. It gives them repeatability and ways to like, you know, absorb damage and then keep going. So those matter, right? But also gives you a pretty strong unique passive that in most of these cases is very, very front loaded. Zazax's base damage I think is like 50 or something, and the percent health damage like doesn't like keep up really quickly. And Solstice Slay is flat move speed decaying and flat health on proc, which are getting changed to percent move speed, so it will scale lightly with things like boots, which maybe you don't have boots 1 by the time it's done, or you don't have boots 2 by the time it's done, or your teammate might not have it by the time it's done. And the health is getting changed from flat to requiring around, I think it's like, I did the math, but it's like 1400 health before the support item, so it's like, it's a bit more than just Trailblazer and level 9, basically, in most cases anyway. I'll also say that we are, in many of these cases, softening the one item spike of supports a little bit, but because supports are losing an item slot all game via a mix of a control ward slot, and wardstone's a decent item to be fair, but they're also like sightstone itself from the support item, it's, well, since you're capped on -1 slot, why not have this item, or these items, two of them, scale so that you feel less like you're weaker than all other champions at 18 on a full build, because his item will slightly make up for it. And it might be that we have to go a bit harder here on HP ratios or percent max health damage or whatever else, but trying to smooth it out somewhat so it's less of a one item spike when you play support and more of a carry through the game, and have closer to full build parity. Lost Chapter upgrades are getting 5 haste each. They're just a little bit underpowered. Terminus and Black Cleaver are getting satisfaction runs where they're just going to stack faster overall. There's a random story here. Because I'm going to cut this down, I'm not going to tell it very much. But basically, I briefly made Terminus scale linearly with champion level, and it had some weird interactions based on how the item was coded, where it felt like it was a rounding error, where it'd be like, oh, you say you give 5.3 armor per stack and that your max armor is meant to be 15.9, but it's not 15.9. Give me a fourth stack instead. And just like weird stuff would happen. So it's back to breakpoint scaling, so we don't have that rounding error anymore. That's pretty much the entire story. I thought it was interesting at the time, but so some random things happened because of like weird scripting stuff, whatever. Regardless, again, usability on Terminus and Black Cleaver. Stridebreaker's active move speed is fixed to actually decay over 3 seconds now. Technically, the buff was 3 seconds long, but the decay only took 1.5, and it decayed down to 0, so it was functionally 1.5 second buff. Both Black Cleaver and Stridebreaker are getting QOL to make the Phage move speed trigger if you would deal physical damage. So if the damage is fully shielded, like a Cassante E, looks a bit better. A bit higher, a bit more healing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on very simple changes here. I'm going to talk about things that are meatier. Right, so some simple buffs to Ahri. Some nerfs down to Aurelion Soul to bring him back a 1% win rate. Bard, overall, this is here as a small reshape. Essentially, Bard is far too tanky for being permanently ranged, not having to put himself in that much danger to play the game out. We probably could have gone a little bit harder on his baseline durability, but I think it's okay. This is basically to say that if you're going to play a riskier build with items like Shurelya's and Imperial Mandate, you're not going to lose that much because your base damage losses are going to get compensated by your AP ratio gains. But if you are going to play full tank Bard, you're going to lose some power. Bard, in the current version of League of Legends, doesn't have very good scaling. He doesn't have very exciting items, so you might as well just build full tank. That is always really sad when your only build is full tank, but you clearly have things you would like to express your gold through. And so giving him more reason to build things like ability power, getting some plus base AS, so an item like Rapid Fire Cannon or Natural's Tooth is a bit more approachable, a bit more appreciable. And then again, AP ratios on the passive and Q with a compensation to not level 1 base damages. So essentially what this means is Bard is actually a stronger champion levels 1 through 3 as a lane bully, and then begins to lose power as he gets 5 or more chimes and gets rank 2 or more on the Q if you don't build ability power. Fiora's minus AS is going down. Alawi is getting a tentacle damage cut. This is the total AD ratio going down by 0.15 to compensate for the fact that she's doing about 10% more damage and healing for about 10% more health than she was prior patch, largely due to the tentacle range changes. Jace is getting some changes that skew him toward being a melee champion and thus building fighter items like Shojin and Cleaver. So it's the melee form mana on hit and the melee form DPS of the active are going up. A little bit of base AD because it happens to be low. And then putting a root during the start of the E-cast, which is how Lee Sin R works, to help have a more consistent trajectory of the knockback. Let's spend some time talking about Cassante changes here in this patch. Ultimately, this is meant as a roughly power-neutral reshape. The TLDR of my thoughts on Cassante. So first off, I want to say that I think we have made significant, meaningful, appreciable gains on Cassante over the last several months. So compared to Cassante on the Worlds patch of 13.19, he had a 44-point-something% generic solo queue win rate and was a very present pro champion. If you compare him to today, he is a 47-point-something% win rate solo queue champion with twice the pick rate and, again, is a rather present pro play champion. Now, Cassante is not by any means a must nerf because of pro play. This is opportunistically saying, I think we can make further headway in making Cassante a healthier champion in solo queue and pro play. And the large thing here is actually around his speeds, around his intentionality, and around being able to read what he is doing. I think Cassante is a very, very skillful champion. I think most players would agree that he actually requires quite a lot of skill to play, be the fact that the only skill bracket where he's actually very successful is above Masters and in pro play. That's, 0.5% of the player base or less, right? So the thought process here is he is skillful to play, but I don't believe that skill expression is understandable by his opponents or just by viewers of Broken Blade or whoever is playing this champion to a high level in pro play. And so this is why I'm going after mostly things that are speeds. So I'm going to start with dash speeds. This is actually some of the first stuff that I did here in this work. I'm going to tell you where the dash speeds are ending up. So the just blank E dash speed on the ground is Vayne tumble with boots 2 facing an enemy champion. That seems like a very reasonable speed for a dash. That is the new dash speed of baseline Cassante E. That is a 40% nerf of the current dash speed. Cassante's dash speed, and by the way, as one extra piece, this is intentional, I kind of hemmed myself in a little bit, that dash takes just over 1/4 second to complete, and 1/4 second is the minimum cast time of baseline Cassante Q. So as long as you press Q within like 2/100ths of a second of pressing E, you can just dash during your entire Q animation and never lose any distance at all. As long as you can adhere to a very tight timing test, EQ does not lose you anything at all because you can cast Q during your E. The benefit is that the dash is much more readable by being 40% slower. The next one is to his allied dash speed when he's jumping to an allied minion or allied champion. That dash speed is massively increased. It's actually rather long. And the new speed is it's faster than Braum W and slower than Rakan E. I think that is a reasonable speed for dash to an ally, give them the shield. That is literally what Rakan E does, and is somewhat similar to what Braum W does. I think it's reasonable for Cassante to be faster than Braum and slower than Rakan. So to me, that is a reasonable dash speed. That is a 30% decrease in the current dash speed of him Eing to a minion. To be fair, this dash will take longer to complete than the Q because the dash speed is increased pretty substantially. The dash speed is increased some, and the dash distance is increased very, very large amounts. So this is one where if you press E to a minion, instantly press Q, your Q will complete before the dash ends, so you will have to learn a new timing, if this is something you use a lot, of dash to a minion to land a Q. This is no longer nearly as fast. It is still fast. The final one is the all-out ground dash speed, which is being slowed down to once again complete in about 1/4 second. The percentage increased dash distance compared to base E is the same as the percentage increased dash speed compared to base E. So this is another spell that will complete in about 1/4 second, which to me is a readable dash and is still in the upper end of what Fiora Lunge can do. Fiora Lunge can go between, I think it's 800 and 1600. This is going to be 1450, which is faster than most lunges, but like not... recently triggered a vital near the R. I have boots to like the fastest, Fiora lunges are faster than this, but like slower than the fastest possible Fiora lunge is still a very fast dash. This is the number at which it felt like, okay, I can actually read that this dash is happening. And again, a max range dash will take just over 1/4 second. Now, empowered all-out Q is at its lowest a 0.17 second cast time. So once again, if you're going to use EQs during all out, you will have to wait about 0.08 seconds to like ensure you're getting max range out of the Q. I think that is learnable. I think it'll be fine, but if I am wrong, I can give some of this back or something. But regardless, I think this is a big deal to make this. And by the way, that is a nerf of about 20% on this skill. So those are roughly the numbers on the new dashes, which I think, again, will make these skills more readable and say, oh, okay, I understand the combos he's doing. I understand this is an EQ combo, or playing against it, I might have some room to counterplay you or see it coming and play around it or something, right? It's increased windows for counterplay. It's increased readability for opponents and spectators. The next one is the RQ slow. What's funny is all these lines are things that I added in the 13.20 update, and they're all going away. So first is the slow on all-out Q. This was here to see if we could get him off Iceborne Gauntlet. Losing the slow during all out was like, okay, but what if you don't lose the slow during all out? Ultimately, the thing that's more important is keeping the cast time decrease here to let him feel fast and more skirmisher-like in, like Riven Fiora, sort of agile fighter sort of size, not quite Master Yi, but, tanky-ish fighter sort of shaped. Regardless, he's still an Iceborne all the time, and so having extra chain slows when the cooldown and cast time are already decreased, there's just not any point in time where you're not slow with this champion, and so allowing you to at least walk away sometimes against this champ is an improvement to counterplay, and so the RQ slow is going out. He's buying Iceborne every time anyway, so it is what it is. Next one is to the R plus W cast time. No longer is the cast time being shortened to 0.5, it's staying at 0.75. Ultimately, this combined with the dash speed being as fast as it was in prior patches meant that, like, okay, Kasada's getting ganked. Okay, he's going to ult you through a wall, E at Mach 10 backwards, then press W and dash at Mach 10 backwards, and he just created 1,200 units on you, and it took him very, very little time. The W dash speed is still increased from 1,400 to 1,800, but the channel time is going to require that extra quarter second like the base version does. This will add a lot more readability to the skill, and make it, so that players have room for counterplay, and that you can kind of tell when watching him as an esports spectator what he's actually doing when doing these buttons, because he's already mashing a ton of Qs and autos. W is going to remain an intentional inflection point style skill. The other change is R plus W will no longer lower the cooldown during All Out. This means that several points in time, he will not be able to possibly cast 2 Ws during All Out. All Out already resets your W once, and so having reliably 2 casts and sometimes even 3 every All Out meant that because he was on this tight 20-second time frame, he kind of had to press W the second his All Out started to ensure he'd get his second W out. By making the cooldown such that it's, for several points in time, unlikely to get your second W out. This means that you only get one anyway, so you should preserve it for the point that matters. Instead of, oh, I should just mash W on cooldown because the cast time is short and the damage is very reliable and it's very high. I don't care that it's a parry. I'm just going to go try to burst you. It's like, well, no, I only get one. This means my total possible threat during All Out is lower, so I better make this one count, and because I'm only getting one anyway, I might as well try to make the damage reduction count, and now I'm using it more intentionally, and it's going to matter more. So hopefully all these things are to make the prospect of playing K'Sante more intentional, and making his good moments actually stand out and being appreciable. Because of course those are direct nerfs, and we think K'Sante isn't necessarily weak for the vast majority of players. Some direct buffs coming in. The W ratio. W's gold scaling is still an incredibly small portion of his damage scaling overall, so bring it up pretty substantially here. It just honestly has been undertuned the entire time, and just trying to bring it back to somewhere that's reasonable. His mana, I think, has actually been tuned pretty well. So where we were with K'Sante back in, for all of 2023 and up until, I forget when we did the next K'Sante nerf, but regardless, for a long time, K'Sante had a 15 mana cost Q. And what that meant was, even if we had all the gameplay around you can't Q3 flash, or you can't tap W in a Q3, like all those hit confirms, you still with a 15 mana Q were able to spam Q on cooldown, and then at any given time, E forward Q3 and speculate for a knockback. And if it landed, you hit confirm your entire combo. That speculation only costing about 45 mana for Q1, Q2, and Q3 meant that all he did was speculate all laning phase, which made him, I would argue, not very skillful. When the mana cost got changed to 28 to 20, I think, by rank, this now became very punishing, and you could no longer spam Q to speculate. However, I think his mana costs are a little bit too high right now, and even defending yourself is kind of not worth it. Where it's like, they took a bad play. It's maybe not worth me spending 82 mana or whatever, 84 mana on trying to go for the punish with 3 Qs. And so I think the tuning is a little bit off here. This is not lowering the mana cost on Q, but giving him some more base mana to give him about 1 more spell cast per recall. It's not a ton, don't get me wrong, but I think we're pretty close on mana tuning, and so it's a light tap up because I think it's a little bit low, but it's meant to be, again, a bit of light power and then some base health. There's a pretty good chance that him having a pretty abusable first few levels allows us a lot more room for his pro power level. But ultimately, him having very little health for a tank feels kind of bad. And regardless, this is a world where we're hoping that these changes do a lot for our pro skew, and you can just be kind of baseline tank and feel good about it. Otherwise, we're going to scroll through a lot of stuff pretty quickly because there are some small changes. Kaisa is getting a very, very small buff to rank 1 and rank 2 R range because she's getting better with Terminus buffs this patch, with the Rage Blade and Shiv buffs in the previous patch. Her pick rate and win rate are increasing. She's doing pretty well on new builds, so she doesn't need that much power, so that happens. A bug fix to Callista. She wasn't getting bonus dash range on Boots 1. That's obviously strict power. She's already a top, like, 3 pro play champion. So a pretty light nerf. Primarily compensation for the passive itself. That goes down. Lu's been bad for a while. Bonus damage on Q, bonus shield on E, bonus damage on E. A little bit extra health on the R from AP ratio. Malkaders from last patch were directionally very good in closing the gap between support and his other 2 roles. But he's still too good at support. Aiming at about minus 2% win rate as champion with some armor, some minus Q damage, and some minus R duration. Rek'Sai's kit update is coming in this patch. I'm very excited about it. I think it's really, really cool. I think it's really, really fun. If you want a really big deep dive on Rek'Sai, you can take a look at the previous video on this channel, which was a like 40-minute deep dive into the Rek'Sai changes and why they are there. TLDR, she has more health regen through the passive. She has more speed through baseline move speed, E cooldowns and E dash speeds, and more crowd control through a buffed up unburrow mechanic. But she has less damage as recompense. Overall, from what I've seen, players who have played her have been largely positive. Of course, some people like the old build. One thing I want to talk about with the build is that we can tune around this. The ideal build is Sundered Sky, Titanic, Stride Breaker types of items. Not all 3, you can't get both Titanic and Stride, but like health and AD as your build, not lethality, not full tank. It is very easy to tune that to be the case. If she is going lethality, we can convert more of her spells to magic damage. If she is building pure tank, we can put AD ratios back into the kit as recompense for base damages. If she's overtuned, we can nerf. If she's undertuned, we can buff. Not a big problem, but the shape of the kit is looking really good. We think we've hit a relatively good tuning. We're okay with about 2 to 2.5% bonus win rate when the patch hits. That is kind of the upper limit of what she's allowed to be powerful at. We'll see how players feel. If she has to be tuned down, we will, but I think it's important personally to give a good first impression when a champ comes out. And this to me feels a little bit like a relaunch. It's some elements of the old Rek'Sai kit back from 2014, and so that's kind of the thought here. There are some minor nerfs since the last PvE update you may have seen. Base health regen is down a little bit, E cooldown is nerfed a little bit. Still, this cooldown is much, much better than it is on live, and her health regen, though the base stats are low, you get a bunch of the passive, so it's fine. But hey, by the way, there's a couple of nerfs on the most recent PvE build. There was an accidental bug fix to one of the E dashes. So the way Rek'Sai E was scripted was it basically tried to find an exit point for the tunnel and an exit point for you, and occasionally would fail to find a good exit point for you and does not give you one, and you just like wouldn't complete the dash. I rescripted the E to just have a unified system where it just finds the exit point and just makes your dash exit and the tunnel exit the same place, so you can never have that happen anymore. This technically lowers the full dash distance of baseline E. It doesn't matter because the dash speed is so much better in terms of like, right, time and distance covered is clearly a better spell than before. But I wasn't intentionally fixing that bug, but by unifying and kind of making the script a lot cleaner, this ended up fixing a bug that was very annoying to Rek'Sai players around not having a completed dash. Also, one thing that we discovered, I learned about today via a PvE report, was you could make your R not do anything. TLDR, R is actually like 4 spells / buffs. There's an instant cast wrapper that says, hey, become immune to Tahm Kench ulti. And now cast R for real, which is the like quarter-second cast time where I burrow. This then gives me a buff that tells me to dash to you. That gives me a different buff that puts an area around me and says if my primary target enters this area, deal damage to them. I think that's more or less the entire scripting of the ability. But because the R wrapper is instant cast, and all it does is say, put this buff on me and then cast the real spell, and the R go into the ground spell is a real spell, the way League's engine works is you can cast instant cast spells while auto-attacking. Even if that auto-attack is uncancelable. This is the tech where Wukong can start his Q and then immediately R, or start his Q and immediately E, or start his Q and immediately W, because they're all instant cast spells that put you in a state, but an uncancelable auto-attack will complete. And it all works just fine. You cannot cast spells with a cast time while doing an uninterruptible auto attack. So if you're Trundle and you're mid chomp, you can press W but not E or R. You can cast the instant cast spells, not the ones with cast times. By converting Rek'Sai Q into an uncancelable auto attack, this meant that you can burrow mid auto. You could cast R mid auto, but only the first part of R worked, and then it would try to cast the burrow thing and say, I can't do this, I'm currently auto attacking, and this auto attack can't be canceled. So I'm not going to cast a spell, and the spell would break. We learned this today. This has been in playtest for like over a month. Never ran into it. No one ever R'd during a Q animation. So the unfortunate bug fix here, because a better bug fix would require rescripting the ultimate, which is not acceptable on this time frame. The patch is going live in 6 days. Is Q is, for now, a cancelable auto attack. This is not ideal. and I will try to get the time to change this in 0.5. This will probably require rescript the ultimate, and if that comes into problems and takes too much time, there are other priorities. Then I'm sorry, Rek'Sai, if you right click, you'll stop autoing with Q. It's not great, it's not ideal, but it's better than the alternatives in every way that I can think of. And so for 14.4, if you right click, you can exit out of your auto attack animation the way that all basic attacks already work. Empowered attacks normally lock you in. This will be an exception of the empowered basic attack that does not lock you into the animation. So hey, by the way, be careful when kiting. That said, because the Q is so much faster as an auto attack, there's 45% bonus attack speed while your Q is active. It's still very, very quick. It's actually pretty hard to cancel. You have to be like really, really trying to kind of grief yourself by right clicking right away. So it shouldn't be a big deal, but this does exist and I feel bad about it. Okay, simple buffs to Renekton, more healing, better cooldown on E, and more health on the R. Smolder is a little bit OP. We're doing a very small thing on the spread of the second evolve of Q. This is very, very few extra projectiles, but technically there's some extra projectiles. There's also a bug fix where Mom won't die if Smolder dies while she's flying out. Okay, those are fine. Very little power, but obviously correct to do. Anyway, what we have discovered is that 3 points W Smolder with a Doran's Ring is currently a little overpowered. Not massively so, but a little overpowered. His best build is also Doran's Ring into Shojin Leander's Riftmaker, which feels a little weird, but for now, whatever. We're not in a rush to kill that build. If players are enjoying it, players are enjoying it. Whatever. Ultimately, the thought process here is if players are having fun, good, players are having fun. That said, the build is OP, and so we should nerf it some. And so it's basically, on low ranks of W, a cooldown and base damage decrease on W. AP ratio, to be fair, is unchanged right now. But an increase to the bonus AD ratio, so that if you're playing Doran's Blade and you're going first item, Essence Reaver or whatever, you make up some of the ground via a better AD ratio. But if you're playing AP for your first 6 minutes, wow, hiccups are rough here. I'm gonna try to get through the rest. This rest is pretty fast. You're gonna have less base damage and a worse cooldown until you get 3 points into Q. That said, 3 points into W. The W rank of instead is actually getting higher. It's now going to be 1 second per rank instead of 0.5, and the damage per rank is going, I think it's like plus 40 instead of plus 25 or something per rank, or plus 15, I forget exactly, but regardless, the rank episode is higher. So, hey, what players are playing and enjoying is Doran's Ring 3 points W into stat Q, because now you've got Q evolve. That's fine, we'll embrace that. It's OP though, and we'll nerf it a little bit, and that's fine. And the build that's not doing very well is pure AD. Here's an AD ratio buff to close the gap some. It's probably not perfect, but it'll close the gap some, and that's okay for now. I assume there will be still some more small Smolder follow-up, but he's not very over the line. He's a little OP, and that's okay. But that's a little OP, and so we're nerfing him. And then it's going to be, I think, reasonably okay, and we'll keep track on it. Some Soraka buffs, some Thresh buffs. Twisted Fate is overall doing a bit too well, so there are some nerfs in Twisted Fate. We want to take about 1% win rate off ADTF and about 1% win rate off of APTF. We're trying to go after the things that are really, really bursty. So basically because, just TLDR, he's just doing a bit too much burst damage right now. The blue card ratio being 1.15 is just extreme when he's got stack deck sometimes available and Lich Bane sometimes available. Like, he can apply a 2.0 AP ratio. It's actually, I think, 2.05 in one auto attack. And that's really, really egregiously extreme. That's kind of not okay. Yeah, you don't always blue card people. Obviously, you want to gold card people. But hey, if you're Reginald, this is a really big nerf. Can't catch a break. Regardless, AS growth will affect APTF some, but not as much as it affects ADTF. You guys about his autos way more. We think this will be about the right amount of magnitude on ADTF. And then this will walk back AP a little bit more because this won't do all the magnitude that we want. Obviously, blue card is not every W ever use. The E ratio only matters sometimes, but it exists. Varus, just sort of with Kalista, is a top 2 AD carry in pro play. This, to be clear, is a pro nerf. It's -2 AD. It's not a huge deal, but I'm always sad when we have to nerf a champion who's not clearly winning in solo queue for pro. But right now, we, as Summoners Rift team, we serve both pro play viewers as well as people in solo queue. Sometimes these things aren't reconcilable, And this is the case of Varus right now. And sometimes they are in the case of Cassante, where I think we're making meaningful gains in sort of both directions here, right? And ideally, I want to do this stuff as much as possible, where we move the champion the right direction, the right way in both directions, and that's the goal, but it can't always happen. And so as it is, we do sort of pro play some. My thought is to do it not too much, and so far we haven't really been, right? This is, I think, this patch is our first set of actual because of pro play nerfs, and that's not bad to have like 2 light taps a month and a half into the season. Not bad so far. There's a set of Volibear changes that are aimed at being buffs. Overall, a lot of this is trying to clean up some, what I will sort of negatively call design debt. So the R turret disable is a pretty rough mechanic from a readability and satisfaction perspective, is the sort of stance that I have and a lot of the other designers have as well. And so this is being nerfed by 1 second to make it less of the power budget of the champion. A lot of this is because Volibear's gameplay pattern, especially as a jungler, has very, 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 very little variance. He walks at you with bonus move speed, and even if you like stun or root him, he just gets his Q back and keeps walking at you with bonus move speed. Now, you still might be able to get away. That's fine. However, hiding under your tower, which is the kind of thing that would let you say, hey, by the way, this dive's going to be tough because maybe I outplay you. I have like a Zhonya's, or I use like, Jack's E, or do something cool, or, find the right stun or the right something to make the play happen. Volibear's like, no, you don't have a turret. We're just going to wait your Zhonya's out. And you just kind of die in the 2v1. And so the more that Volibear removes context from fights, like he doesn't care if you're under a turret or not. He's going to R for the slow and the gap close anyway. He just happens to say you don't care about turrets. Right? The less that's in his power budget, the more there is room for some combat variance around Volibear. So that's part of that. This could have been a bigger nerf. It's a 1 second nerf for now. The other change is converting his R to normal unstoppable and not CC immunity, which means if you like throw a Xerath E at him while he's ulting at you, when he lands, he'll be stunned instead of ignoring the stun entirely. This is, I think, just the correct shape for this spell. It's more like a Malphite ult or whatever, where, yeah, you can't knock this guy out of his ulti dash. That's just how we trigger ulti dashes, basically. Great, but you're not going to ignore the crowd control itself. Cool, some more context, right? More spells matter against this champion. So to be fair, these are direct nerfs to a champion who is already quite weak. But the buffs are meant to be very, very big. It's a substantial R cooldown buff to make up for R being less usable, but the damage is still there, the slow is still there, the basic unstoppable is still there. Those still matter. E is one of his fairest and highest gameplay skills, a cooldown buff there. It does a lot of damage, it's got a lot of shielding, it's a really big skill for him. And move speed on the Q, which is, it's a flat increase in the move speed, and that increase is doubled when running towards enemy champions, so much more mobile Volibear, Overall, again, the goal is buffs. We think they are buffs. If we get it wrong, then we can always go for round 2 of buffs here. And then finally, a change to Zyra, nerfing baseline damage on her passive by 4 flat damage. I, per Zyra support win rate, am trying to see if we can have Zyra mid and Zyra jungle be viable champions. If there really is no player base there, that's fine. We can just nerf Zyra. We can just bounce Zyra support around just Zyra support. But if she can get, a quarter of her total play rate in a secondary role, then cool. We've opened up another mage for mid laners or another mage for junglers, and, at relatively low cost. This is why I chose the passive instead of the direct plants, because minions don't dodge the direct spells on the Q and the E. And so, those are full power in a situation that matters, whereas the damage of the spell itself doesn't matter nearly as much for Zyra support. She's just triggering plants on you. The amount of actual ability power gained in mid and jungle is a little bit higher, so, they can rely on AP ratios more than just the base value of the plant. You gain more XP in jungle and mid, and so level scaling on the plants is better for them, compared to level 1 base damage. And this is also adding in a buff to the specific anti-monster damage on the passive to give Zyra a more comfortable early jungle clear. I think this change will make Zyra jungle viable. Not trying to make her as OP as Brand was when we got into health stat shards and bugged passive application and whatnot, but Zyra as a viable jungle I think should be fun, it should be enjoyable, and so that's the thing. That's the patch preview. Hope you enjoyed watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.